questions. This is pretty much detailing mechanical, automotive, obviously, models. If you got any questions that go along, interrupt. I have no problem with that. Pretty much just going to go over some tips and guidelines for the prep, painting, mechanical parts throughout the car, engine, chassis, such as everything mechanical. Right off the bat, things like the engine transmission parts are basically different textures, so you need to know what texture you're going to work with before you get into the painting. Some notes you want to make: a lot of the engines, a lot of models come with the engine block, oil pan, transmission in halves, and you want to remember that the oil pan usually doesn't have a seam down the middle, but in many cases transmissions do. You want to check and make sure that what you're building is, what you're going to build is going to be represented correctly. Rule of thumb: the block and the oil pan, there is no seam. It's a cast item in a stamped pan, or aluminum cast pan possibly. The bell housing, usually not going to have a seam on it. It may have a casting line, but not likely anything you would see. Transmission, most manual transmissions do have a seam, and where it's put together, if you glue it together carefully, you can get a reasonably good-looking weld or cast seam, excuse me. And the transmission pan, right in the middle of that, a lot of times is molded. You do have to remove the seam from that. Traditional, glue it together, sand it techniques works fine. Then you get into the finishing of that. You've got basically raw and cast texture parts throughout the engine. The block and the heads, intake manifolds. Your carburetor can be cast, raw cast in many cases. Usually it's a finer texture. Transmission is also a sand cast item. Bell housings can be cast. They can be also stamped or machined. Most common street cars, production vehicles are all cast items. You can texture with paint. It's the easiest way I've found. It's really simple to do. Spray cans work real well. On to other finishes before we get into that. The polished and chromed finishes, things like intake manifolds, valve covers. You can get a lot of carbs are polished, available polished or chromed. Timing covers is another popular item that is chrome plated on hot rod and mild customized engines. Headers can be polished and chromed, obviously. Metallizers, foil are the most popular, easiest ways to work with. I personally don't send anything out. I try to do everything I can by myself. You can use bare metal foil to replace the damaged areas of vacuum metallized parts in your kit really easily. I can go over that. I didn't bring anything, but I think most people have used the bare metal foil, and there's a couple of simple techniques that can really make it work easier for you. Painted items on engines are usually the block and heads, intake exhaust manifolds. A lot of times they do turn out to be raw cast textures or weathered after a while. Carburetors are also often painted and customized. Valve covers can be painted. Bell housing usually is painted or partially painted from the factory. I've got a lot of experience with GM cars. I know how they were put together. And in many cases, front half of the bell housing is painted because it was put on the engine while they painted it, but they weren't trying to paint it, so the back half isn't. There's a soft edge around it. Whenever possible, when you're painting things, I prefer to spray, airbrushing if possible, but spray cans are usually acceptable. I have more experience with the airbrush. And weathering is a huge benefit. In a mild amount of weathering under the hood, on the chassis, even on the cleanest street car you ever see. A daily driver is going to be much dirtier, but you look at some of the show cars that people still drive. I don't get underneath and clean the backs of my wheels and underneath the springs, and a little bit of weathering can go a long way to turn it a really clean car into looking like a real car. And as far as wiring is another point on the engine that's very important, but it is so widespread. There's so many different ways to do it. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to address it. But basically, you drill at the distributor or the coils, and drill at your heads, and route the wires as you see fit.
Just in terms of the weathering that
yes.
you do, what technique do you do? Do you do a wash type of weathering?
I like wash and dry brush as the basic, as the start with. I usually do a wash first. Tamiya has a product or a paint called Smoke, and they also have the semi-gloss and semi-flat blacks. They have a color called German Gray. Those colors, they also have a flat earth and a rust brown. There's several military colors, and they equate to earth colors. And by mixing them with, some people like to use Windex. I use their thinner, the Tamiya thinner. rubbing alcohol also works, and straight water. They all have different ways of reacting with the paint. If you want a smooth blend, the Tamiya thinner works pretty good. If you want something a little more splotchy, use water. If you use the alcohol, you might actually lift up some of the base paint, and when it dries, it'll be kind of chalky looking. And these can all be used in the direction you want to go with it. After I do the washes to do the shadows, and where you may have had a coolant leak at one point, you can put some rust in there. There's all sorts of things. Again, open the hood, look at your car. There's a lot of things that you can just look at and see, and then go about with the colors and the palette of colors that you have to replicate it. Once you get in that general area, you can do the dry brushing on top of it, and you can use either the same colors that are lightened to give a different shading effect, or you can use a completely different color, like a gray, to make something look like it's been scuffed. If you look at underneath the hood of your car, things that are black, there's probably 20 different colors of black. And there's brown blacks and blue blacks and gray blacks and green blacks and red blacks. And if you have everything painted the same color black, it looks really clean, but it's almost too sanitary. And again, even on the cleanest show cars, it's not that it's dirty or even weathered as far as use. The materials that they use to make the fan belt is not the same material as the hose. Could be from the same company, but it's not exactly the same shade. So all the different colors, all the same colors can be different colors. Same thing with silvers, aluminums. Depending on how dirty they are, or whether it was bead blasted, whether it was peened, whether it was painted and polished, all these things, they're still silver, they're still aluminum. But you can get different effects and different colors, and then there's also different sheens. For example, a bead blasted manifold is going to be coarser and lighter and dead flat, where the same exact manifold being peened, where they rolled in ball bearings, it's going to be darker and a little bit shinier, not glossy, and a smoother texture. Okay. Please, questions? Oh.
On the subject of wires, particularly under hood, under chassis, things like that, single wires, whenever you get them down to the scale size that we need, which is the first issue, using the material that we have doesn't behave very well, because we know that the wire, when it's under the hood, it follows a pattern or it runs alongside something. When we put them in, they want to raise up, especially like ignition wires, look almost like a big peacock.
Yes.
Spreading feathers. So what do you do to make wires behave so that they lay close to a manifold, or they lay down close to another thing is in bunches, harnesses, tips for harnesses to make them look realistic, to clamp them, to make them look like they're following a route, because the firewall, they got that stuff on there. You grind the stuff away, or you lay wires on top of them, you drill holes, you do grommets, things like that, because there's a lot of harnesses that is everywhere. And
True.
you can just sort of get away with a lot of stuff, just kind of, just some ideas.
Okay, well, let's start with the ignition wire. You try to find something that's as close as possible. And there are a lot of wires out there that you find in electronic stores that look pretty good and are the right colors, but they may be harder. In that case, you've got to form it. And it may be just a matter of forming it by hand, forming it around a paintbrush handle, an X-Acto knife handle, a drill bit to get it. And if you use a round form to go around, you're less likely to get that kink. And a lot of times you actually have to bend an ignition wire like you're bending a brake line or something. And you can, one of the big things that you can help yourself with is to anchor your distributor very well. You may want to drill out drill through the bottom and anchor it in with a pin of steel or brass. I like to use brass rod and brass pin. You can put a brass rod in the block, use the next size diameter, smaller brass rod, put it in the distributor, epoxy it, crazy glue, what have you. When you put it together, you've got a nice, solid, workable piece. Then when you're prying on it and mashing the wires all around it, you're not as likely to pop it out. Another thing is some of the aftermarket wires. Detail Master is one that I use. It's soft. It's really soft. And if you're going to err in making the wire the wrong size on ignition wire, you're almost better off going too small, unless you're doing a Pro Street or a Top Fuel, something where you got huge, massive wires. And it'll help you in both ways. It'll conform, and you'll run out of room a lot later in the project. If you put too big of wires in, you'll start running out of room, and also size problems, where all of a sudden your carburetor springs, in order to make them look right to the spark plug wires, are going to be way too big compared to the carburetor. You're using a carburetor this big, and you've got a scaled throttle spring that's this big when it should be this big. So if anything, error on the size of being too small. It'll make everything look cleaner and crisper. As far as the firewall situation, sometimes removing everything and starting fresh is the way to go. It depends on the subject you're working with. But if you're really going for that busy look, a lot of times you can take and paint the firewall with everything on it, do all your detail painting, use the looms, keep them there, and think of it as a loom that's already, a lot of cars have multiple looms, especially cars of the 70s into the 80s when they got into the computer-controlled stuff. Use that as a loom that's there, then lay another one on top. And you get more depth, more busyness, but it also have to factor in, you're taking up more space. Are you going to have room between the firewall for the heads or anything else?
For paint details for those wires, what do you use?
I
Ones that are already molded onto the firewall?
I use predominantly testers enamels for detail painting. I use lacquer thinner to thin it. I've never had a problem with it going bad any faster than any other thinner. It dries quicker, it dries harder, has a nice consistency to work with. I use, what brand brush am I using now? It's a Winsor Newton. It's a pure sable. I don't care for the synthetics. I use a liner type brush, it's almost an inch long. It holds a lot of paint, and that's part of the key, is that even though it looks like a big brush, but once you get used to it, it holds so much paint that the paint stays moist longer, and you can make a pass over an entire wire, and you don't get that clumping or drying out at the end, and that helps a lot. But I actually paint the wire. Actually, there are times where I'll put wires on a car and paint them afterwards because I couldn't find the color. And the reason I do that is because if you paint the wires first, as you bend it, the paint flakes off and chips. And if you try to touch it up, a lot of times you end up with splotches or texture problems. And you can a lot of times wire it kind of loosely, get it on all the way around as far as you can see, but there may be the other color not visible on the back side. Then push it in once it dries. The enamel dries pretty well, 2-3 hours. Overnight's better. And if you're going to be doing a slightly weathered engine, it doesn't matter, because one of the later steps is you're going to go over it possibly with clear coat, a satin, or even splotchiness, and that'll all blend it together. Any other? Yes.
I found that the new testers acrylic really stick really well to the wire covers, because the enamels don't seem to want to stick.
They don't want to dry as hard. It seems almost like a chemical reaction I've noticed. The Tamiya acrylics work real well, but I haven't had a lot of luck with the gloss Tamiya colors drying hard.
I had some black, I needed some red battery wire, and I didn't have any the right size, so I said, well, okay, let's see what it does. And I just took some Guards red out of the tester's acrylic and painted it on there, and then bent it all around. It never came off.
And it dried hard.
Yeah.
I haven't worked with the new tester's acrylic. I didn't have a good experience several years when it first came out. And I've had great experience with the enamel, so it works for me, so I've stayed with it.
Well, I think that's the point.
Yeah. Yes?
I've had some luck with Tamiya's bigger kits, like their motorcycles or Formula cars, where they have that hollow vinyl tubing.
The clear or the black?
Either.
But
Probably more with the dark ones, like the brake lines on a motorcycle, to run a wire through it.
Yes.
You can bend that.
Absolutely. I used it on, I've got the red Super 7 in there. And the radiator hose, the upper radiator hose, it snakes around in a pretty serious curve. The real one is formed. And it comes, when you take it out, when you buy it, that's that size. When you put it on, it stays that way. Well, you get a chunk of curved rubber hose, and you're supposed to make it fit and snake it around. On this one, I actually used a paper clip. And different wires do different things. Because of I needed a strong memory, so I used a paper clip. And I used the same technique as far as bending and wrapping it around X-Acto knife handles and large drill bits to get it. And a lot of it, you bend it further than you want, and it will come back. And one thing you do have to watch out for is at the end, in many cases, you may have, excuse me, it's my wife's program. Yeah, another story. When you wrap the wire around, you leave a little gap to plug it onto your fitting. You either want to put that space so it butts right up against it, or give it enough slack back here so that you've got a free curve. Because I've seen a lot of times where people have done this and they join it on, and then you have a kink that's just an unnatural looking kink. So you can keep that in mind when you're putting the wire in.
Say make the inner wire longer?
Well, the two choices are the inner wire should butt up against the plug or the fitting that it's going to go onto, so that you have a nice straight fitting, or you move it back far enough, you have enough open space that the hose can actually have a nice natural curve rather than forcing it into a more of an acute angle, or it's not a kink, it's just not natural looking. And it's one of those things that just adds up underneath the engine compartment. Too many things that don't look right just look negative, portray negatively.
Yeah, on that color thing, I don't know if people have tried it, but sometimes I just kind of go for wild ideas. But I've had some luck with gel pens, and I've had luck with Sharpie markers.
Yes, I've used Sharpie markers.
A variety of color pencils. Go to an art supply store and just buy an assortment and play around with them. And sometimes you get consistency, you get line width consistency, and you get those subtle shades of tones, because if you do a color pencil of a certain painted color, it'll give you a hue, and you can kind of play around with that kind of stuff. And then you say when you do the washing in between, you get darkening, because if a wire's laying next to a wire, you get a dark
Yes.
line.
You're forcing, you're playing kind of a game, you're forcing shadow and perspective,
Yes,
and it really does do a neat thing. And that's where you want to use the Tamiya thinner, for example, with the Tamiya, because you get a soft blend. But there are times where you want to possibly make it look like something leaked and it ran down the side and was splotchy. And you can mix it with other, the water makes it very, very chunky, and when it dries, it almost leaves water spots in it. And the other water, if you use water, it will take possibly 6 or 7 hours for it to fully dry. You can use that to your benefit too. You can go back in after it's already created these spots and put another color on top of it, and it'll look discolored. You can make oil you can make dirty and clean oil stains down the side of an engine. Imagination is one way to go with it, but reference off of a nice dirty car doesn't hurt either. Yes.
Were you going to talk about bluing on chrome exhaust headers?
Sure, I can.
I was going to throw out.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no
Titanium
problem.
Clears,
Yes.
red, blue, orange, and yellow.
Yes.
And the thing to do is to find photos or go to a car show and look at how they glue, because they don't glue in certain places, mainly in
Right.
bends, and the sharper the bend.
Different color. Yes, different colors.
See how because it blues in a certain way. The hotter parts of the corner where the exhaust is going through is going to be a different color than at the ends of the.
It's usually kind of they start out when they first start to change color into a goldish color, and depending on how old the exhaust is, you can go different shades of color. And I don't think you really get the bright blue unless you have an acute bend, like coming right out of a Honda exhaust or something. And another trick with that is you're saying you blend it from the blue into the red because there's a purple. Another way, after you do that, sometimes it looks a little harsh in a model, and right. And one way to do that, again, with the weathering is you can use a little bit of the smoke mixed into those colors. Try not to mix the smoke into the yellow or the orange because it gets really dirty really quick. But you can put it on over, thin it down. I like to use Tester's Dull Coat and Tester's Gloss Coat. They're both lacquers, but they dry so quick, and you're not putting them on for a shine or a wet coat. But I use it kind of as a base maker. Put a little bit in my airbrush cup, put some lacquer thinner in it, get it into a nice consistency, and then I tint it. I put the acrylic in it. Again, you throw it away when you're done, but the acrylic will thin with lacquer thinner. In fact, anytime I spray the Tester or the Tamiya acrylics, I do use lacquer thinner. If you try to use it as a wash, it turns into something not too usable for me. But again, you can tint. Now you've got a very thin tint of the color that you've chosen. You can go back over and soften where all those colors go together. And you can even have fun and go in with the gloss coat after you're done and hit certain high points to make it look like dirt's built up in the grooves, and it'll be flatter. When it's all dry, since you have done it with a lacquer, even though it's an enamel tint and you've done it with a lacquer base, you can use the acrylic with the acrylic thinner as a wash, and it won't pull up what you've already done as easily. So you've basically created a layer that's kind of where you can undo to if you have to.
That really makes if you want to try to make a model, if you're making a model look like a driver.
Absolutely.
That's one way to really do it, because it's the first thing you see, especially if they're exposed.
Yeah, and another point on exhausts, when you look in the tailpipe, a lot of cars, if it's running really rich, it'll be black. But a lot of cars that are running really where they're supposed to be are either gray or sometimes kind of a tan gray, yes. And you can do a tan and a gray and then put some splattering, like you take a toothbrush and splatter into it. I'm talking 12 scale. 25th, this must be kind of hard to do. But a lot of cars do get a little sooty as they go, and every once in a while you get some spitting of carbon as it condensates in the exhaust system. There's also the discoloration. As clean as we try to keep our real cars, does everybody really wash the tailpipe? I mean, polish it off. Yeah, it does. It is caustic gas coming out. It will kill it. Any other questions on anything? Let's see. Sure.
The Hannah of yours is really nice. Is there any way you could give us your email address and we can email that to us?
The what is?
Hannah.
Oh, sure. Certainly. I thought we were going to have more.
Coffee unless Mark can get the hotel to.
Sure. Anybody? It's Scalemaster, SCALEMASTER, one word, at AOL.com. And please reference that you're from the GSL, because I flush just about everything I don't recognize.
New, okay.
If anybody has anything we've already talked about, has any other questions that pop into mind, bring it up, no problem.
Talk about good bare metal foil to fix that.
Sure. Okay. A lot of cars come with chrome-plated manifolds, and the casting or the molding may be otherwise really good, except for where the fill gate went in, and you've got this half moon shape. If you carefully cut it off the sprue with extra, everybody knows don't twist and that kind of stuff. Cut it off with the extra material, a brand new sharp X-Acto knife, and shave it and contour it so it matches. Don't worry if you take off a little bit of extra chrome, because there is going to be a little flow area. The main thing is just to keep it nice and smooth. If it's sometimes they'll mold it on a flat edge, which is even better for you. Carefully just rework that with sandpaper, 1,000 grit all the way up to 2,000 grit until you have basically a point where the chrome ends to the bare plastic. You take the bare metal foil and cut out a piece right along that edge. You can burnish it down with a toothpick, and using, again, a toothpick with some, I like the Tamiya metal polish, or not metal polish, stuff on the white tube, polishing compound. You can use just the tip of the toothpick and polish the bare metal foil, and you have enough control that you're not touching the chrome, because you will rub the chrome off. I also use Blue Magic polish. It's a little bit more aggressive. If it hits the chrome, it will take it off really quickly. And you just keep rubbing it, and you'd be surprised. The tip of the toothpick will turn black. You can take your rag, your polishing paper towels, what I use. I like Bounty. They're cheap. And you buff it up, and it comes out so close that you'll be the only one that ever knows. But the trick is doing the body work, so to speak, beforehand, and only replacing that little spot. And right where it meets together, it just disappears. You can, under close scrutiny, it may be completely invisible. This works really good on bumpers, too.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about bumpers?
Yeah, a lot of the newer kits, they're being real nice to us and putting the fill gates at a place that's easy to clean up. But there's a lot of cars, especially a lot of the old AMT cars, where they fill right into the end of the bumpers, and you've got a cap. In real life, it'd be about this big that seems to be put on with a huge seam. You do the same thing, do all your body work, try to retain as much of the chrome as possible, and you can just replace that one piece. I find myself, in many cases, stripping it down completely and cutting strips of bare metal foil, following where the contours of the bumper are, and you can wrap it around, cut curved pieces. I did a 12-scale monogram Corvette. Nice model, but the chrome on mine was bad. So I stripped the bumpers and just started fresh, cut curves, and I put the seam just below the center point of the curve of the bumper. And by the time it was all burnished and polished, it looks so much like metal that you don't see that there's a seam just below the edge. If you turn the car over and you know to look for it, you might find it. But I'm after what it looks like. Even though for competition it may get flipped over, for the most part, you're going to look at your model sitting on all four wheels and enjoy it. And it passes scrutiny under photographs.
What do you use to strip the chrome?
In this case, I just sanded it off because it was pitted, and I was curious what was underneath the chrome or if it was in the plastic. Usually I just use Easy Off oven cleaner now. I throw it in the sink, hold my breath, spray it, and, well, I inhaled it one time, burned my nose hairs really good. No, I've heard a lot of people use that, but for me, I've never had a problem with anything being eaten. In many cases, I've been able to strip something that has bodywork in it. The bodywork was done with Evercoat or Ultra Filler, basically a two-part catalyst, polyester. Crazy glue sometimes. I have been able to strip Tamiya lacquers. I've been able to strip not fully cured DuPont Centauri even with it, automotive paint. Yes?
For small parts, I take a plastic film canister full of Parsons Subsea ammonia, drop the pieces in there, and 20 minutes later, pull the pieces out, the clear coat's still on it, but the chrome's gone.
That's one thing I try to get rid of is that clear coat between the plastic, and because I want to go right to the plastic.
Yeah, the ammonia leaves the clear coat.
I've found a lot of times that you see little blemishes in the chrome, it's actually in that clear coat. So for me, the Easy Off works the best. And you wear gloves and take precautions. It works in about probably 10 or 15 minutes for me. But I've got a bathroom that I can make a mess out of. I don't know if everybody else has that luxury. Yes?
A tip, I haven't tried this technique mainly because I just haven't gotten anything built in the last few years. But a guy in our club in Maryland, a lot of times you know how a peak bumper on on the chrome tree when you open the box. Just
Yep.
a top edge or something will have a little bit of the chrome knocked off. Instead of trying to touch it up with silver, he uses gloss white enamel and just brushes it over the little rubbed area. And basically, it's an eye-fooling thing. It's like a reflection. And he says he hides them that way. And
that's interesting. I would probably attempt that with bare metal foil again.
But I mean, it's just another one of those little illusion trick things.
That's really a lot of what this is about, is fooling the eye into seeing something that you've already got in your memory.
Another technique, long time ago, back in the late 80s, I built a Hasegawa Jaguar XJR, and the Jaguar script across the trunk was too fine to try, and there was just no way of getting it chrome, and I didn't have they didn't provide photo etch for it, and I didn't want to try the silver paint routine, and it was too delicate to foil. So what I did after I painted the model, I just went in carefully with an X-Acto knife and scraped the paint off of the letters. They were white, but
the contrast is enough.
Your mind says that the scripts are supposed to be chrome, and your mind is telling you it's chrome, even though it's in a shadow area. So you really
and until you get it this close, you're not going to know.
Unless you're inspecting with a magnifier, as you look at the model, your mind's going to tell you it's chrome.
I'm sure people.
They're nice and crisp because you've just scraped the paint off.
You could have possibly even polished it and gotten the same result with a fine polishing compound.
Well, I did.
I mean, it's just another.
15 years ago.
Oh, I know. I mean, it's now that we have these nice.
It was a little trick that worked. So I mean, sometimes if you're trying to keep a script crisp, and you can't, it's too delicate to foil and too delicate to paint. Sometimes just scrape the paint off the top of it and let it go with that.
Yeah, in some cases, I'm sure you may have read. A lot of people have done this article in a magazine where you bare metal before you actually paint over your scripts, and then you paint it and you color sand where you've got your little bracket of foil, and then you go back in and just polish the top off. It takes a light touch, and it works also.
Yeah, I know several guys.
It's having the forethought to do it is the trick, I think, there. Any other questions at this point? Okay. On to brakes. Basically, we got drum brakes. Back to the texture and material. Drum brakes are cast and machined on the inside. We don't likely see much of the interior. Some have a machined face, but for the most part, they're just pretty simple, dirty pieces. Rust is a real predominant color in it. You can mix rust into your grays, your blacks. Brand new cars are usually a gunmetal or a black from the factory, but the material gets the dust comes out and dirties them up real quick. Sometimes people hose them off through the wheels. I try to keep mine clean, but again, it doesn't always work. Disc brakes. The surface of a disc brake is not chrome. It looks a lot like chrome, but it's not chrome. I find what works really good for the actual braking surface is bare metal foil, and then go in with either an eraser works good or some very fine sandpaper, but that takes a light touch, about 2,000 grit or more, and actually scuff it and dull it down. It's almost got, on real life, it's almost got a whitish, grayish depth to it, almost like it's been clear coated. I have experimented with clear coats. In 12 scale, you can almost pull it off. In 25th scale, it ends up making the rotor look uneven, almost rounded. It loses its crispness, so I don't care for it in the smaller scales, but in 12 scale, it gives you more latitude. The edges are raw cast usually, and the hubs are raw cast, same color, same material. Metallizers work real well, but since they're on such a small area, you can do all your finish work on the face and the back of the rotor and go in and hand paint the outer edge a raw color, and then if it's a vented rotor, doing a wash in it. And if you're not going to take the wheel off, a little bit goes a long way, and just having the hint goes a long way. If you want to get real fun, you can take and find some dotted lines or use decals and actually put a ring around it. And like you're saying, it fills in the blank. Your eye knows it's supposed to have holes and be vented there. It doesn't know that it's only two-dimensional.
Yeah, actually, one thing you can do, too, is you print a little strip of paper with the holes and different colors of paint marks for the different temperatures if you're doing like a racing.
Oh, yes. That wouldn't go on the rotor, though. That would be on the hub, maybe. But most likely it's on the...
Glued on the edge of the rotor.
Yeah, I guess that would... I thought they were on the calipers usually these days. Are they doing them actually on the rotors, too?
Not the heat-sensitive paint.
Oh, okay,
Not
yes.
the stickers.
Okay,
The heat-sensitive
that's a good point.
You'll see lots of pictures in the presentation tomorrow.
Okay. A quick way to do the hubs is circle templates. I've got a metric one. I don't know if it matters. I've had it for so long, whether standard or metric, but it's got dozens and dozens of sizes. Do all your finish work, find the one that's the appropriate size for the hub, just put it there and airbrush around it. Most of the metallizers under light pressure cover real well. Again, if you mix it with some dull coat or even gloss coat, your buffing metallizers will become non-buffing instantly. And
Gotta remember to mask off the holes around it.
I'm talking about the hub, so you're holding the rotor, you're doing the rotor face.
Putting on the circle template.
Oh yes, absolutely. Otherwise you get these little half moon things.
Another trick, Mark, Scale Motorsports, their faux fabric is a nice texture. It'll also substitute for a cast texture.
I've heard other people use it. I haven't tried that yet.
Mark Wells is here. He's here this
Matt
weekend.
Wells.
Scale
Matthew
Motorsports.
Wells.
Matthew Wells, yeah. But you can spray it on and then go over, if you want a metallic, hit it with a light coat of a metallizer after you put the faux fabric on, and it makes a fabulous raw cast surface. The only thing is you have to mask off anything that you don't want to be cast.
Yeah. Okay. We can go back to the engine on that texture. I use primers a lot, only because they dry fast and they come out coarse. Any off-the-shelf Krylon, what have you, you hold it. The farther you hold it back, the coarser it's going to be. It's going to go on drier. Yes, you'll get painted unless you're wearing a glove. You can, with the primers, you can build up a good sandcast texture in 3 or 4 shots. The trick here is don't put on too much. You can always go back and add more in just a couple minutes. Patience pays off. You can get different textures of different finenesses, how tight you want it, using different paints. The Tamiya lacquers make a very fine texture. If you're working in 43rd scale and you want to do a small block, you use the Tamiya stuff. It may take you a day or two because it wants to gloss so well. You have to put it on very, very dry. And it has this neat property for bodies. If you come back in 20 minutes and you shoot it, it takes and goes right into the other paint and lays flat. Not good for the sandcast texture. You can also mix, a lot of times we'll just do a quick spritz of a primer, gives it tooth, and it kind of keeps the primer or the Tamiya paint from flowing so well for this purpose. I've worked on some parts where I'll spend a week every day, just spritz it once, twice, just to get the texture I want. It's a matter of patience. Then you go in with your color coat, your metallizer, what have you. And you can also bare metal foil over it if you'd like. Don't push too hard because it is pliable. You'll pick up gouges really easily if you do try to bare metal foil over it.
How about crinkle effect?
Crinkle
In
effect,
124.
that's pretty much done the same way. You can try to experiment by shooting enamels and then putting a lacquer on it and hoping it goes your way, because it will attack it, but it's kind of an uncontrolled black voodoo magic thing.
Even that faux fabric might work.
Actually, for crinkle, if you scale crinkle down to 25th scale, it's basically going to be flat.
Pretty
You're
uniform.
better off painting it the darker color and then going back with a color that's a couple shades lighter and just putting a dust coat over it. You're not getting a texture. What you're getting is two colors, a stipple effect. So that the lighter color looks like the light.
I'm thinking
reflecting
crinkle
off.
effect to me is almost kind of a veiny.
Yeah.
The Mickey Thompson valve
Yeah,
covers were
but
real
when
popular
you
with it.
scale that from 1 to 1 down to
Yeah, that's gonna be a
25th scale,
tough-
It's still going to be flat. So basically, a stipple effect will give you the lighter color will look like the light reflecting off of parts of the crinkle, and you get that effect without having to do the texture, because any texture you have in 25th.
Oh, if you blew it up, it
is-
would be
is gonna
astronomical.
be the Grand Canyon.
True.
Scale. But it's just another one of these tips.
Good one.
The way of doing it.
Yeah, there's so many ways to do everything, and no one way is the right way. I find myself, even on the same model, creating the same effect different ways, just for fun. Let's see, where are we? On brakes, calipers are really fun. They're really, next to the rotor, the most important thing that you see. They're usually raw, cast raw, and in many cases they're painted from the factory. But today's cars, you look at Ferraris and Porsches, they're coming with bright red calipers. A lot of the street rods and hot rods getting the neat, bring it, bright color, bright yellow. And we're noticing out in California, a really hot trend right now is to paint the outer edge of your rotor the same color as your caliper, also do the hub. So you may have a black car with bright yellow calipers and a bright yellow ring. It's really striking. It's kind of neat. They're using semi-gloss paints, heat-proof paint. I believe it's, I think what they're using is a header paint, and they're clear coating it. I haven't done it myself, and I haven't seen it around that long to know how long it lasts either.
Actually, in the auto parts store, there is now brake caliper paint designated for spray can in different colors.
I believe it. If you pull off the label underneath it, it's header paint. Last year's header paint. Master cylinders, again, pretty much same construction, raw, cast material, steel, sometimes aluminum, so they can be anything from dark gray to aluminum colored, light aluminum, even a little bit of gold tint to them, depending on what car they're on. They get weathered really quick and easy. They're one of the first things that gets kind of dirty looking. One little spill of the master, fill in the master, you got that moisture and dirt collects right to it. So you can have an otherwise clean compartment, and that would be a dirty part. Firewalls are notorious for being dirty because how do you clean wires? Most people don't want to hose it off and have it under the threat of shorting it out, the electrical out. Any other questions about this so far? On the chassis, we're still on the chassis, exhaust pipes. With the stock kit parts, you can pretty much clean them up, make sure they're round. If you look at a lot of production or exhaust pipes, the way it comes from the factory, or when you get a new exhaust system put on, they have big striations through them. Sandpaper, one pass, give you a nice deep groove to look like it's been run through the bending machine. You can take and wrap a piece of tape around the end of it where it goes under the muffler, put a couple thin coats of paint so it has a fillet to it to look like it's been expanded to accept the muffler or the other whatever fitting you're working with. A lot of times you can get some discoloration because it's a hot piece and it gets subjected to water and other debris off of the road, and it cooks it right on. You can have almost any coloring on an exhaust system, and it's pretty acceptable. I've seen old cars with basically rust-colored exhaust systems all the way to things dripping on it. That's another good one, is you've got the front of it can have stuff dripping off of something else. You've got all these different colors that you can have on it. You have a brake line that leaks in the rear. If it runs by the tailpipe, that could affect it. You have different heats throughout the whole range. Some cars you can easily, you have catback systems where you have replaced the rear from the catalytic converter back. That could look almost new and have a bright and shiny tip and muffler on the back where the front of it's kind of rough and worn out. Let's see. If you want to change, I use solder for making my exhaust pipes. I found some nice thick stuff at the electronics store. It works really well for me, and a lot of it already has those striations in it just from the way it's extruded, I presume. And I just cut it with an X-Acto knife, form it around soft things. The one thing you want to wash your hands when you're done, it is lead, and it's probably really toxic and probably bad for you. You can use it with the stock mufflers really easily, just drill it out to accept it. Brass tubing and aluminum tubing. If you don't want to paint it, aluminum tubing works really well. You can find an appropriate size that's just a little bigger than the solder that you're using. Drill a hole to accept it into your muffler, stick it in, really quick and easy. Washes work real good. I've found doing a wash on the top of the exhaust system and letting it wrap around and drip to the bottom and just letting it dry in the position it's going to be on the car. By the time it's dry and you flip it over, it's recreated that same water path that the real car has. That's one thing you want to keep in mind when you do weather the bottom of a car, how it sits. Are you weathering to make it have shading and depth to fool the eye to make it look like it's busier, or are you trying to replicate actual weather conditions? So when I do I usually weather the exhaust system off the car and weather everything else on the car, and get to a point where I actually put the wheels and tires on the car and spray flat earth around inside the wheel wells, on the back sides of the tires. How many times you pulled your wheels and tires off to get new tires? The white letters are still bright white, but there's no tread. And you flip it around and it's muddy brown on the back. Mm-hmm. Well, why not do it on the model? And a lot of people have asked why there isn't much dirt in the tread on my tires when I do this. Because I go through puddles and it washes it out. I mean, it's simple. There is a different tone. You're going to usually have a flatter or even a gray tone on the tread surface that hits the ground because it's scuffed. But inside is going to be a blacker, almost maybe a satiny finish on a newer tire. I haven't tried to put tread bars in to know when they wear out. I'm not, that crazy. Yes.
Hangers.
Pardon me?
For the exhaust hangers.
Hangers, yes. Photo etch works really good if you want to buy them. I save all the little sprues from my photo etch that it hangs on, and just bend it out of that. I like the low budget approach to model building. There's nothing wrong with the aftermarket stuff. I love it. But at the same time, I like making stuff myself and see what I can do on a budget. And especially for an exhaust hanger, How many people are going to know it's there besides you and a few judges? Yes?
I got a tip on, when I'm working with solder for exhaust pipes, I like to start with a piece that's nice and straight, because generally where you want a kink isn't where it's
Yes,
coming
yes.
off the roll. And I usually, I have a little steel surface plate that I use, just a piece of 1/2-inch steel, about a foot square, that I can keep on my workbench for cutting on stuff. But I'll lay it on that and take a steel rule and roll, just start, get it as flat as you can.
Kind of, yeah, just kind of roll.
And it'll bring it out nice and straight, and then you can start putting the
Yes, that's
where
an
you want
excellent
it, the
point.
straight parts where you want it.
It's an excellent
It works
point.
real well.
And a lot of times I'll bend them together, and you can actually get mirror images if you stand them on end. Even though you want your exhaust to come out and go around, if you put them side by side and you bend them down, well, that's actually 90 degrees. You're going to swing them out 90 degrees. So you can bend both exhausts together for a good portion of the mix, of the bending portion, and then you just turn them 90 degrees, and there you've got your even bending. I like to do, an easy way to do exhaust systems is to put mufflers on it, because it gives you a point to go from the header or manifold into your muffler. And I like leaving an open spot, enough room in the muffler to actually slide the pipe in, get it in, and then bring it back up to the header. So it's not actually anchored into the muffler. I anchor the muffler to the chassis. It's not technically correct. You want them to hang free, but when you're talking about, eighth of an inch, it doesn't matter in a model.
How about cleaning up little nicks and things that you get on the solder rod?
I like using steel wool. 4/0 steel wool brings it up real shiny, and then you really have to go back and dirty it up and weather it up. Otherwise, it looks too pristine. Did I see a hand up? No. Since I've got back to the mufflers being mounted, then you can build the tailpipes. The tailpipes are usually, for me, the most bending involved, and you've got to sometimes snake it through, especially independent rear suspension. Having reference is a huge help. And you can also, on some cars, mount the tips to the chassis as they would be, and fix them really solidly, and do the same thing where you fit it into the muffler, slide it back. So you're only anchoring it really at one point, but it gives you that slack both ways. It makes it really easy to do. Okay, rear axle. Okay, we're back there. The center sections of rear axles are usually cast out of metal, and the actual tubes are usually steel or extruded metal. And in a lot of cases, they're just all painted semi-gloss black right from the factory. A lot of the import cars, they don't paint it. You have the tube in one color and the center section in a raw metal color. And so again, you would want to texture just the center section. Most rear ends are molded in halves. You glue them together, take care of your seam work. There would be no seam, casting seam really on a rear end that you would see on a model. Maybe on one of the fins, the structural fins. It'd be so small at this point, it's not really worth trying to replicate. What I do is paint the whole thing semi-gloss black, mask off the tubes or whatever color the tube is going to be, and do the texturing and paint it whatever color I want in the center section, take off the masking tape. And if you did have a bad edge, you may not have masked as well as you hoped, it's a good place for dirt to collect, and you can weather it there. And it could actually look, or work to your advantage to look like debris caught in the edges. Now, with independent rear suspensions, the half shafts are pretty much the same as your drive shaft, and that's usually going to be a semi-gloss black unit from the factory. And the U-joints are usually painted. It's assembled as one piece. It's all shot. Don't forget to use wheel weights, especially on drive shafts. Black electrical tape works really good for cutting little pieces, self-adhesive, and you only need 2 or 3 at the most. I wouldn't want a drive shaft with more than 3 weights on it myself. The U-joints are often replaced after hard driving or normal usage. The ones you get from the store are usually a non-painted, raw, textured color quite often. If you want to get really fancy, you can try and put a Zerk fitting in it in 25th scale. That'd be fun. 12th scale, go for it. That can easily be done just by drilling a hole in one point, putting a small piece of aluminum rod, whatever you'd like. On the half shafts, they would also be weighted and balanced. Obviously smaller weights than you'd find on a drive shaft. And let's see, okay, we got sway bars, and they can be just about any color, especially if they're aftermarket. The aftermarket companies are often coating whatever you buy. You know what brand it is by knowing what color it is or what color they've put on it. A lot of times you can put lots of graphics and decals and stickers on it, advertising of the brand that made the sway bar. The fittings that they stabilize or links most commonly are the urethane type, and they're also often brightly colored. Orange is a real popular color. The factory ones back in the 70s, even 80s, were black or rubber colored, and they deteriorate. So they could be any shade of a weathered rubber color. Also, the new ones can be in graphite, the new bushings, which are pretty much a black or a slightly metallic black. Any bushing on the car, be it frame bushing, upper control arm, lower control arm, can be urethane, rubber, whatever. You've got a lot of latitude if you want to put some eye-catching color points, small things to spice up the model. But then again, if you're going to weather it, they're going to get dirty, and orange will turn into black too. Okay, upper and lower the front control arms are usually stamped steel on a lot of production cars. Things like the Corvette comes with a cast aluminum. A lot of the sports cars are that way. Most of the forged aluminum items are just left raw. Hot rods are commonly custom painted with the same color as the body or a complementary color. And doesn't anybody have any questions? Guess not. Okay, let's go to springs. Springs are more fun. Coil springs are one of the things that every kid has for the most part somewhere on the car. Most cars have front coil springs, and they're really hard to clean up if they're molded in half. If there's a slight shift to the mold, they can be easily cleaned up with a razor saw, rolling it and then sanding it, but it's still a lot of work. Unless you're doing out of the box, it's really easy just to take and wind your own springs. Telephone wire, right out of a telephone. Comes in a nice gauge for 25th, 24th scale. Sometimes it's a little smaller, but again, it's back to that. If you're going to err on the side of one way or the other, at least you'll have gaps that you can see instead of looking like a compressed spring in the front suspension. I found some really nice blue ones that, yes?
Michaels or someplace like that.
Have you found, is there big enough? See, I always go there looking for the smallest. I haven't even thought about that.
Big enough depending on the scale you want. If you wrap it around a screw thread, it gives you a nice even space.
I usually wrap it around a drill bit of what I want, and then I pull it apart till it's what I want. And I pull apart just a little more than I want. Make sure you clip the ends in the appropriate position depending on how it fits into the control arm. Real springs, sometimes they start and finish at the same place. Sometimes they're 80, 90, or 180 or 90 degrees off. You slip them in there and you can compress it, and then you've got that nice tight fit. I've got several solid color wires I found in old telephones, so they're great for sports suspensions. It works great for NASCAR. In fact, it's probably almost a necessity for today's NASCAR builder for the rear springs. Some cars use the monoleaf in the front, such as the Corvette, the C4 and later. I actually put in my Camaro, I've converted it to the monoleaf in the front. It's made of fiberglass, and it's a brownish black color. And they also have retrofit parts for a lot of leaf spring cars to put them in. It's a neat hop-up item if you want to go a little different on your model. It's easy to turn a regular leaf spring on the back of the car into a fiberglass monoleaf. You just fill in where all your leaves are, sand it smooth, take off your shackles because it is one piece. All you're going to keep is the spring eye and make it nice and smooth. Paint it using candy colors, mixing a brownish color and paint it over black, and go into your weathering. You can actually put a little bit of gold metallic in it too. It's a strange color. There's no wrong way to do it. There's so many different shades of it.
There's a side benefit to using the wire out of the telephone. It eliminates that testy ringing.
None of you have a cell. I wonder if there's really fine wire in here that would work. Where was I? As far as regular traditional leaf springs, which are still very popular, they are, when they're brand new, they have little sheaths in them and they're coated with grease. And even though the leaves themselves may be a semi-gloss, a lot of times that grease leaks out and makes a mess. So the first thing that gets attracted is dry dirt. Depending on where what lifespan of the car you're at, you may want to make it look like it's oozed a lot of its grease out and made a mess, or it's collected the dirt on the sides. The brackets that hold them together are usually loose fitting. It's you can go in and scribe them, give them a little bit of a shadow effect, helps quite a bit. Let's see. I think I'm getting close to the end. Torsion bars are pretty straightforward. A lot of times it's easier just to take on your Mopar kits, cut the torsion bar itself out, and replace it with a piece of rod so you don't have to try to true where the mold line is. Just true the end cap. I wouldn't want to get into trying to adjust it or anything. It's just... Okay, I think I'm running out of information here. Some questions, please.
Panel lines.
Panel lines, okay. What do you want to know about panel lines? How to describe them? Or
Make them look realistic on the car.
with paint? Well, if you have a white car or a yellow car, when you look at the panel line, you're not looking at black. You're looking at dark yellow or dark white. It's really a shadow. So if you put black on those cars, most likely it's going to look too heavy. So if you did this, for example, a yellow car and you want to put panel lines in it, I would probably scribe the panel lines again before you paint it to get a nice, deep, crisp edge. And what's really important is that the surface edge of the body is uniform, because if it's not, it's wavy. As soon as you put that darker color in, you're going to have a gap that goes in and out. So a lot of it's prep work, and you have to put on a nice uniform paint job without heavy spots, which would also affect it. To mix the color, if you're using enamel or a lacquer paint, I'd still think that you would want to go with an acrylic for your recess line. Maybe let's say you used Luma Coupe yellow, did a Boyd's Coupe. You wanted to put a darker line in it, use the Tamiya flat yellow and tone it down with just a couple drops of semi-gloss black, or a drop. Doesn't need to be that much darker, and run it through there. If you don't make it dark enough, it'll look like a mistake. If you make it too dark, it'll look kind of gaudy. That's why I would recommend that you use an acrylic. You can put it on like a real paint, let it dry, and either polish it off or use the thinner or Windex. Windex works really good at removing it. I prefer to polish it myself. And while it's still, even though you've accumulated all that polishing compound in the groove, go right into the sink with a soft toothbrush. It'll come right out. It won't leave a problem. Then you can wax it. Again, after you wax it, go in and remove the wax with the toothbrush so you don't have a residue in there. It might look real if you left a residue on some cars. Anything else?
Any suggestions for doing party lines on tubing, headers, and exhausts and stuff like that? Getting rid of them?
I just use the back of an X-Acto knife and sit in front of the TV. It's just a monotonous job. I don't have any quick secrets. I use a lot of sandpaper. And
those will get a flat. What the problem is you don't want to create a flat. Right?
Well, unfortunately, if optimally all you're dealing with is a round molded piece with flash on it, but most of the time you're dealing with a slight offset, and you've got to actually turn the tube into an oblong shape. Otherwise, you've got to turn the whole thing down, and it'll be too small. So really what you're attempting to do is just mask or hide the seam on it. And I use not the sharpest X-Acto knife, semi-sharp one. I use the back of it most of the time. I don't want to gouge in. I really hate filling a header if I've gouged it and having to fill it. It just adds a lot of extra work. In some cases, you're also going to have ejection pin holes in the back that you have to assess on a one-by-one deal. Do you want to fill it? Can you see it? How much of it can you see? How much work do you want to put into it? Sometimes it is easier for me to actually cut off the header flange, do all the work, and reattach the header flange. It just depends on each individual circumstance and what you want to do with it.
The flexible thing that I'm talking about.
Yes, it looks like a coping. It's like a coping saw with a little band in it. Yeah, those are nice, and you can actually squeeze them so that you don't have as much tension. Yeah, those do work well. I personally don't use them. I use sandpaper, just the way I've done it all these years. If I acquired one, I'd probably use it. I just haven't gotten around to it. Airplanes? What are they?
Can't carry those there.
Any other questions? Doesn't have to be about detailing mechanical. Yes?
I got it kind of late. You guys talk about Alclad at all?
No, but we can. What do you know about it?
Well, I tried it the first time and had dismal results.
The old Alclad or the new Alclad?
Brand new stuff. I used their black primer and everything. The chrome Alclad, yeah. After about a week, black was showing through underneath, and it got real dull, and I had to redo it with bare metal foil because of the Alclad.
I use a lot of bare metal foil, and I know a lot of people don't like to. It seems to be one of those things, either you pick it up and it works, or is frustrating. And I've had my frustrating days with it, but I really like the fact that you can handle bare metal foil and not have to worry about it tracking like toner. You can polish it with metal polish. I've run into very few things I can't bare metal foil.
You can't polish it off. I found that real quick.
No, and I've seen your oils from your fingers will leave a fingerprint that you may not even see for a day or two.
You can't touch it. It makes me wonder, how's this stuff going to look in 5 or 6 years?
Makes me wonder how people are gluing their bumpers on myself. I haven't tried it yet. I've got a bottle, and I'm waiting for a project. But the Alclad 2.
Did you put it on in one heavy coat or multiple light coats? Two light coats, okay.
First of all, you got to use a gloss black enamel, or otherwise it just don't come
I
out.
use the Alclad gloss black.
Basically it.
But for the aluminum, you use a lacquer, I understand. There's a difference.
It doesn't make any difference what you put black, as long as it's glossy and smooth.
Okay, the instructions that I've got say...
Actually, it does make a difference. I've done several bumpers. In fact, my King Cobra that's in replica has the front bumper done with the Alclad chrome on it. And what happens is that you got to use. I've been using Tester's Model Master spray can, heat it up, spray it on there, and get it as smooth as you can. But the trick appears to be is you got to run it at about 10 pounds on your airbrush.
That's pretty low.
Yeah, but through your cup, run it through my little cup at 10 pounds. And when you do that, in fact, every time I use any of the Alclad, I run it at 10 pounds, and you get much better metal sheen out of it than if you run it at higher.
Now,
When you run it at higher, it becomes just like paint.
Now, when you put it on, is it coming out kind of a mottled finish and then it settles and looks good, or does it look...
Yeah, there is a reaction.
How long does it take from when you airbrush it to it starts to look...
Probably about 15 to 20 seconds.
Okay, so maybe a lot of people are flooding it on thinking it needs to gloss up like a...
It's an incredible thing. If I've done it only a couple times and sprayed on like one light coat and then went back just a few seconds later and did the second coat. And you sit there and watch it, and it's real dull. And then just all of a sudden, it's like the paint surface starts moving. And it's this reaction thing, and it goes from the dull to the chrome, and it's not even. It just kind of happens here and there, and all of a sudden the whole thing is chrome, and it's the most incredible little thing to
okay,
watch.
so you use...
It looks fabulous, and then within a week's time, you get dull. And black was showing up underneath it.
Well, now, some of the old metallizers had a sealer that they sold. I think it was but it always killed it.
They can use a sealer on anything.
There is no sealer by Alclad. What about an acrylic?
Elaborate on what Len said. I found I get better results using about 30 pounds with the chrome.
What kind of airbrush are you using?
Just a Pache H model with the
I use a Badger Crescendo.
So this is a thing I think you just need to
Yeah,
experiment.
yeah.
I just took a simple Badger external mix one and just misted it on.
Low pressure?
Really, well, no, regular 25 psi for low pressure, but misted it on real fine, not just barely see it coming onto the part. Just keep misting it on and laying it on real thin. Like
So
the
how many coats are you?
frame on the little-
How many coats are you putting on?
One, but
Okay, just one
scale.
continuous.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
okay.
frame on the little 124 scale motorcycle out there's got the aluminum on top of gray primer.
Okay, and is it polished afterwards?
Nope. If you polish it, it'll come off.
Yes.
One of my cars out here, I painted the wheels, and I used Tamiya's gloss black out of the can, aerosol,
Mm-hmm.
and then misted it by airbrush, real stop down too, at low pressure. They look pretty good.
I'm going to have to try it, but
The new Tamiya